Welcome to the Psychology Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Hoye. The Psychology Talk Podcast is a unique conversation with experts in the field of mental health from around the globe. Topics include hypnosis and mind-body treatments, ethics and cultural diversity, psychotherapy and psychiatry, emerging treatment modalities, and much, much more. While you're listening, please give us a like and subscribe to the show. It helps us to continue to provide excellent programming. And now, here is the episode. Hello and welcome. Today my guest is Richard Dixey. Richard is a senior faculty member at Dharma College in Berkeley, California. He's a research scientist and a lifelong student of Buddhism who holds advanced degrees in biophysics and the history and philosophy of science. Dixey directed a bioelectronic research unit at a London hospital before becoming CEO of his own biotech company. He moved to the U.S. in 2007 to devote himself to teaching meditation, deepening his own practice, and running the Light of Buddhadharma Foundation in India with his wife Wangmo. Today, he's here to discuss his new book, which is really like a pocket meditation guide or mentor, 3 minutes a day. Richard, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Hello there, Richard. Nice to see you again.
We have internet.
Yes, we have internet. I hope everything works fine and dandy for the next 45 to 60 minutes here.
Okay.
Good. Yeah. And also, I take it it's a better time for you to meet with me.
Yeah, I'm not so good early in the morning. I can do it, but it's not my preferred time.
I wake up early, but conversing with people earlier, or like I've had an aversion to especially if you heard it now, American drive time radio, like early morning. It's just horrible. Yeah.
Yeah, no, proper people don't speak to anyone before 11 o'clock, basically.
Well, that probably does take place often in the UK outside of London and other bigger cities, right? Certainly in Ireland, they don't wake up until noon, I'm sure. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. That's how civilization works.
Real civilization, not these city dwellers. Yeah. Well, it was good to meet you last week. We did talk about I had mentioned that I am married to somebody who's from India, so I go.
Oh, yes, you did mention that. Yeah,
I go several times. You're married to somebody who's Tibetan, so we kind of have that in common.
We go several times. Well, 35 now, but anyway.
Yeah, I think I've been about 10 times. I've been there. Yeah. I
love India. I just love it.
And you go like usually once a year to Bihar, right? You go to
we do, although we also take these Buddhist chanting ceremonies right around India. So we've started doing orbits. So we now do Bihar, UP, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu. That's the full sweep. And then Assam, Tripura, Mizoram are coming on too. There's really quite an interesting sort of S-shape collection of Buddhist communities in India, none of whom speak to one another, typical Indian manner, but nonetheless communities of people. And we're really trying to encourage kind of pride in India for their Buddhist heritage, because it's their religion. I mean, it's their national religion, actually. And Buddhist India was completely dominant for over 1,000 years. And there are, in Bihar alone, there are 10,000 Buddhist sites.
There's a lot of stupas there, right? Yeah.
10,000. And across India, it must be 50,000. And some of them are massive. I mean, we're talking acres of the huge stupas. I mean, it's like crazy. They're hills. So, there's a big national amnesia that happened due to lots of complicated reasons. And as a result, although when you scratch an Indian, they recognize the Dharma, they don't overtly do so because it's not in the educational system. So, but when Buddhist monks go on walkabout, yatras, they find villagers coming running out of their houses saying, "Oh, Buddha, Buddha, Buddha." They know what a Buddhist monk is. It's amazing. The village people do. And, there was a Brahmin takeover in the 14th century, which was a very systematic destruction of the Dharma. because the Buddhist monks, of course, were taking the Brahmin business away from them. It wasn't nothing to do with the Muslims. The Muslims really weren't responsible. It was the Brahmins. And that takeover was completed with the remarkable and very clever idea that Hindus are vegetarian and Buddhists are not, so Buddhists are unclean. This is the most remarkable example of propaganda, because you know the Vedic religion, that was what Buddha was actually addressing at his lifetime, was a meat-eating animal sacrifice religion. Mm-hmm. And vegetarianism and purity only came in to distance themselves from the Buddhists. That was the idea.
Oh, wow.
Show that Buddhists were, quote, unclean. All that crap about cleanliness was actually a device, a polemical device, very effectively done. So the Buddhists unclean.
And I take it a lot of the caste, people who are the lowest rung of the caste system may have been people who were Buddhists who did
They were rendered outcast. Right. So what happened was that when this Brahmin takeover occurred, all the Buddhist believers, because the Buddha didn't have a caste system, were by definition outcast. And so you find, this is the amazing thing about India, which always amazes me. For example, in Bodh, do you know Bodh Gaya? Have you been there? Do you know it?
I have not been to Bihar.
Oh my God, you must go to Bodh Gaya. It's a trip. But anyway, you go to Bodh Gaya, and across the river, there's something called the Sujata Stupa, which is a stupa built in the 2nd century BC to honor the milkmaid, the famous story of the milkmaid who comes with a bowl of gruel and gives it to the Buddha, and then he eats it, and then he goes to the Bodhi tree and becomes enlightened. And she's called Sujata. The village is still there, right beside this stupa. It's a 2,500-year-old village, and they're all Buddhist outcasts. So this is a really good example. That whole village was, of course, a very Buddhist village because it was a Sujata, and they're now all Dalits.
Wow.
And, so India's weird, like it just preserves. I like to say it's preservation by neglect. They simply ignore and everything just survives.
I don't know about you, but as a first-time visitor, I recall specifically feeling like I was going on a living archaeological expedition. So
right.
On the superimposed kind of globalized culture with all the iPhones and iPads and computers and whatnot, and of course there are a lot of wizards doing mathematics and technology. They're building a lot of that stuff or working for companies that do, and then on top of that, tons of gods everywhere, random temples here and there, and just like machines everywhere, historical. It's preservation by neglect, as you said, but really also just preservation by swimming in a lot of it still.
Yeah, well, it's just the Indians never bother to replace anything. So, you go to an Indian house and the old shit's still there along with the new shit. They never throw the old shit out. They just leave it there. So everything's done by accretion.
Yeah.
And they never bother to clean up. I love it. It's like a 100 million square mile junkyard. Actually, it is changing. It is changing. I have to say, it's beginning to modernize. And of course, the worry is, will it lose its dharmic roots? I don't think it will, actually. I've got a lot of faith that India is going to become a Dharma superpower. And that's what we're working towards. The Light of Buddhadharma Foundation, which is my day job, really, is to bring back to Buddhism the Dharma tradition that it once was the head of. And, it's really working well. And the surprising thing is that, as I say, the Indian upper class were always Buddhist. So Nehru famously was a Buddhist. If you go to the presidential palace in Delhi, it's full of Buddhists. He was clearly a Buddhist. And it was an intellectual sort of elite thing. And then there were the Dalits because of Ambedkar. And Ambedkar converted to Buddhism for social reasons. So the Dalits and the upper class. But the amazing thing is that even the middle class people, once you start talking to them, it's almost as if the veils begin to clear, because so much of their religious culture is actually Buddhist. All the ahimsa stuff is Buddhist. Every Hindu spire temple is a copy of the Mahabodhi. Mm-hmm. They all have that little roundel on top. And that roundel is actually a stupa on the top of the Mahabodhi temple. That was the original spire temple of India. And all the time you find when you go and you look at old temples, they're actually repurposed Buddhist temples. So if you go to, say, Ellora, and you look at this amazing Shiva thing, actually at the base are Buddhist lions, a seated Buddha. It was a Buddhist temple. They just repurposed it. And so, it's kind of an interesting experience.
How many Indians know this though? Like how many, like, I mean, my wife's upper middle class family, they kind of know that. Yeah.
Yeah. They kind of know it. I mean, it's like one of these things where you've kind of forgotten your relatives and then you kind of, they're familiar. Who are those people? It's a bit like that. You're kind of waking up and, we're obviously going very gently because we're not trying to offend anyone. All we're saying is this is your religion. Buddha was an Indian. He wasn't he didn't come from Iran like your, Vedic bunch were. He was a real Indian guy. And this is your religion. This is your indigenous religion. And now what's happening is Modi is actually espousing Dharma. So he is now leading with Dharma. So when he goes to visit Asian dignitaries, he gives them a stupa. He started to do this. And that's because I think he realizes that Dharma is a uniquely Indian phenomenon. And actually, I don't really have an issue between Buddhism and Hinduism. They essentially co-evolved. Certainly in the later period, they were very, very mixed together. And so to me, I haven't got a big issue. In fact, the Nyingmas, I'm trained by the Nyingmas in the Tibetan tradition. We actually have Shiva on the shrine. Shiva and Ganesh are regarded as shrine objects in the Nyingma school. And that's the earliest of the Tibetan schools that inherited Indian Buddhism most completely. And, so there is really a big issue. To me, it's much more of a political issue. And what's happening is that as India emerges on the world stage, its identity as a country is being identified with this word Dharma. And that really combines Jains, Buddhists, and Hindus. They're all religions of the law as compared to Christians and Muslims and Jews, I guess, but there's so few of them, or Parsis that are religions of God. So, Hinduism and Buddhism share the fact that ultimately the ultimate power is law, not God. God is not the ultimate power. Even Brahma is subject to law. So, there's a very interesting and I think a very important distinction there. And the thing that really worries the Indians, of course, is Muslim takeover. And, I'm not against Muslims either, but there is a habit in Muslim countries of trying to subvert the indigenous culture and take it over. And what they do, unfortunately, is they insert upon it essentially Arab culture. And so Islam is totally inflexible. Everything's in Arabic. The whole deal is Arabic. And Buddhism is there are three great missionary religions. There's Christianity, Buddhism, and Islam. And Buddhism is the most flexible. So when you go to Bodh Gaya and you sit under the Bodhi tree, there are about 30 different countries who turn up. Honestly, they're wearing different outfits. They're doing different things. They're in their own language. There's almost no unifying theme you can find in what they're doing. And that's the genius of Buddhism. It literally closed itself in the new culture. And what's happening in America and in contemporary culture is we're seeing the transition of Asian tradition into contemporary culture. And that's very much what our Dharma College is about. We're trying to do that, to find ways of expressing these things in Western language. It seems
to me that reading through your book and a little bit snooping a little bit on your website and whatnot and finding out about you, your idea is to do precisely that, and and there is a kind of technology that, well, it's not a technology; it's just an understanding of the subjective experience of humans, and the codification of that in Buddhism, in Hinduism, with various techniques of approaching the mind through meditation, through self-observation, and walking in Dharma, right? It's a way. It's something that I think the West has lost because we're so outwardly focused.
But I want to say something.
Yeah,
you are assuming a metaphysic. You talk about the word subjective experience. As if there was objective experience.
You know what? I think that's just a force of habit. There's a force of habit there.
No, it isn't. It's actually a metaphysic.
Right. The only thing you really experience is kind of yourself. Yeah. Yeah.
And we live in a bizarre cultural phenomenon that came about from Galileo and the overthrow of medieval science.
Correct. Yeah.
How there is an objective experience. There is no objective experience whatsoever to anybody at any time. And that's really the fundamental message that the Buddha taught. Within this 1 fathom body of man, I declare the origin of the universe and the end of the universe. It's within the body itself that everything happens. Everything else is inference. And to me, that's a fundamental. It took me years to get my head around this. Yeah. And people are always saying, we need to unify science and Buddhism. No, of course we don't. Science is an inference about the, quote, external world. Buddhism is actual experience. They're not unifiable. There's no unity between the two of them. They represent two domains.
Yeah. And I think that, and this kind of like mind-body split, this Cartesian split has been around for some time. But the eventuality of it is if you work that through into culture long enough, it plants a seed of doubt of your own existence and your own selfness or worthiness or worthness.
Alienation,
which is one of the huge problems we have right now.
Yeah, and I call this the 3-card trick. So what happens is you go as a little toddler to school and you're the center of your life and you're really happy. And then you're taught about the, quote, external world. And your entire education is couched in the third person. And then that's the second card. Then the third card is you are insignificant. All that matters is the external world. And in those 3 moves, they've turned you from the center of the universe to you to be an insignificant onlooker on some cosmic thing that's got nothing to do with you. It is the most remarkably stupid and yet totally pervasive educational trope. And not surprisingly, everybody comes out of school alienated. And, you land up going, what is the meaning of life? And that's it's getting worse and worse and worse. It's not getting better. It's getting worse. And to me, that's the fundamental benefit of bringing these Asian meditation traditions. They put you back where you belong in the center of your own experience, which is all that exists for you. There is nothing else that exists for you. And to me, that's so important. And so I feel quite passionate about it that, we're on the road to ruin because we have fantastic technology being run by children who don't understand their own experience. Well, what is going to happen? The bigger the guns you give your 4-year-old kid, sooner or later, they're going to blow their heads off. And that's exactly the danger we're in. And to me, the Asian traditions are incredibly valuable. And we're lucky that they're unbroken. I mean, for some miracle, due again, well, actually, this was really the genius of the Buddha to create this monk's rule in such a manner he did. But in any event, they have preserved unbroken. Whereas if you go to the West, there is not a single religious, esoteric, secret, whatever you want to call it, tradition that isn't broken. They're all broken. And they have to then be reconstituted by people who say, well, I'm announcing myself as the mage of Alexandria or whatever, and going to some book or other. And that's, you've got to have unbroken lineage. And they do exist. And, I meet loads of monks and they're absolutely, completely confident of their Vinaya going back. And there have been times when there have been only handfuls of monks, but they've managed to keep it going. And to me, that's incredibly valuable. And again, vision into the past.
I would say that in a way, there's kind of bifurcation of East and West, and never the twain shall meet. I think that's kind of a misnomer.
I don't buy that.
Yeah, right. But so
actually, Indian culture is really European culture. You know that, right? Alexander the Great brought to India a Greek culture, and Ayurveda, this astrological system, all kinds of elements of the worldview are actually European. Really, Asian culture begins in China, and China is different. It really is. They don't have the 4 elements. They have 5, and one of them's wood. You're like, what? They have all kinds of weird things that are really, truly different. But India is actually really the easternmost part of our single group. The only difference is it doesn't have Semitic religion. But, Emperor Ramses II had an Indian doctor. And if you look at the shape of Karnak, and then you look at the shape of South Indian temples, they're the same. there's quite clearly been massive cultural exchange from really predating
absolutely.
BC. Yeah. Because, the trade winds, if you get on a boat in the springtime in Arabia, you land up in India, and in the autumn, you get in a boat, put the sail up, you land up in Arabia. It's really simple exchange. So my view is India actually is the easternmost of what we would call our culture. And then you go to India, go to China, and it's very, very, very different. For example, have any idea of liberation in Chinese religion? Confucianism and Taoism are about becoming in conformity with what exists. There's no idea of moksha, which is fundamental to both Semitic and to Dharmic religions. The idea that you can be liberated in some way is totally absent in Chinese religion. And, it's a very interesting phenomenon. And, so we would say it's a worldly religion. They really don't have that. Now, of course, Buddhism got into China, of course. And in fact, China was the most important Buddhist country after the fall of Indian Buddhism. But they always were interested in Tathagatagarbha, this idea of the Buddha field. It was sort of field theory Buddhism, which of course had catastrophic results in Zen in Japan before the Second World War. But nonetheless, it's a very different form of Buddhism from Indian Buddhism. And I think that's deeply interesting. And that really is Asia. So to me, India feels not familiar. I mean, I'm sure you have the same experience. You go to India, you feel like you're away from home somehow. You're not in some really alien culture. It feels kind of familiar. And that's because it is. And that's the Greeks who brought so much. And indeed, in the Pali, as you may know, there are dialogues. One of the Pali canon constituents is a book called the Miananda Panha. And the Milinda Panha, or the Miananda Panha, is a book of Nagasena, who's a Buddhist monk, debating with this Greek king. And they're having a debate about topics. Because, of course,
I do know that. I do know that, like, from history, there were a lot of like gymnosophists, right? Like basically yogis who went to Greece before Alexander, I think, right? And I think they had a large. Little bit like it's possible. There's not much evidence. There is a philosopher called Solon who was clearly influenced by Buddhism, and there's always been this suspicion that there was, because Ashoka really sent missionaries, west. And, he would have crossed Greek culture. So, and the Greeks were very tolerant of other religions. They liked to debate. I think the whole debate tradition comes from the Greeks, actually. I think the whole phenomenon of debating, which is such a feature you see in Tibetan Buddhism now, is really great. I think that comes from the Greeks. But maybe even the pre-classical, it's escaping my tongue right now. Can never step in the same river twice. The pre-Socratics. Yeah, pre-Socratics, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Nagarjuna.
Uh-huh.
Nagarjuna replicates all of the paradoxes of Zeno verbatim. And in fact, the whole Nagarjuna emptiness doctrine comes from the paradoxes of Zeno. No. And they are literally verbatim. The idea that he somehow rediscovered these paradoxes when he expresses them exactly, Achilles and the tortoise, the arrow, all of those paradoxes about time. And I think that's really, really interesting. And what almost certainly happened was that Greek culture and Indian culture interacted, and that was the birth of the Mahayana. And there is a suspicion, which I think would be non-trivial, that Christians had something to do with this as well. I think the Buddhists influenced the Christians because the parable of the Sermon on the Mount is quite clearly a rehash of the Paramita teachings. And then Thomas the Apostle went and set up shop in Kerala, where they still have an Aramaic mass. They're Kerala, India. Fucking incredible. Yeah. They're still practicing an Aramaic mass, the only place in the world. And Christ is a great man, a Mahasattva, who sacrifices himself for the good of all. It's kind of like, that is not what the Buddha taught. It's not that he didn't teach it, but he never stressed it at all. And yet suddenly, like magic, it appears in southern India. And you have to go, wow, is that possibly Christianity that's kind of got in there somehow in Buddhist traditions? And then the amazing thing is there is a tantric feast called a Gana Chakra, a sock. I don't know if you've ever seen Tibetans doing this. if you look at the Christian communion and you look at the sock, they are identical.
Wow.
They're literally the same phases. Everything is identical all the way through. And they have the 108 bead rosary. Again, 108 beads.
Right.
And you think, wow, can't be coincidental. In fact, my daughter, bless her, who's studying religion at Duke, is going to write a thesis on this. I don't think anybody has ever truly researched it, because the parallel is really striking. You can put them side by side and they're the same ritual. Of course, one's in Christian language and one's in Buddhist language, but the actual ritual structure is identical. And I think, again, it must be cultural exchange. And so, we're in this weird position where Buddhism is familiar to people brought up in Christendom, what I like to call Christendom, which is essentially the backdrop to contemporary culture in the West. And I think that's why that's why there's a Buddha in every bathroom. That's one of the reasons we don't feel threatened by Buddhism in the way that we might feel threatened by an alien religion, like a voodoo religion or something. Right. And so to me, there's something very interesting about the pervasiveness of these ideas. But what's lacking and what we're trying to bring is this systematic exploration of subjectivity, which is what the meditation traditions offer. It's systematic. It's not random. It's not mystical. You're not trying to find some vision of God or something. It's very, very laid out. And remarkable thing is that the insights that are recorded quite clearly in medieval writings by meditator monks are now being confirmed by neurophysiologists. I mean, really surprisingly precise data. And that means that this information that you can generate subjectively must be the case. It's not mere opinion, because it can be confirmed experimentally. Now, that to me is deeply and profoundly important. And again, points to the fact there is another way of knowing, which we need to remember. And it's a bit like waking up the Indians. I sort of wake up the Westerners, say, hey, guys, remember, you have subjectivity. Don't forget your subjectivity as if it doesn't exist. That's just crazy.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's like walking around blotting yourself out constantly.
Yeah,
and I thank you for writing this book, 3 minutes a day. And I think this is obviously part of your mission, but it's not a missionary text in the sense that you're trying to convert anybody. You're just trying to sit down and 3 minutes a day. If you can do that 7 days a week for each one of these exercises, it's a very nice way of introducing people back to themselves.
Yeah, that's right. Because Buddhism is not about converting anybody. Buddhism is just about trying to introduce people to what things are. And that's what the Buddha said himself. He said, hey, don't believe me, for God's sake. Just test what I'm telling you. And if it works, do it. If it doesn't, bye. There was no issue. Right on his deathbed, he was dealing with people who were coming up and asking him pointy questions. He wasn't in any way trying to convert people. He was saying, look, if you look, this is the way it is. That's it. And to me, meditation is like that. If you can give people the way in, the problem with all meditation traditions is the reference to which the terms are pointing are internal. So you can't pick up an object and say it's one of those. They have to have an experience before they can give a referent to the name you're using. And so my difficulty with the way the Asian tradition is being introduced into the West is twofold. One, it uses all these technical terms and people don't know what they mean, and it's difficult to point them out. And secondly, it's made for monks. So, meditate for 5 hours. Yeah, sure, I'm a monk. I don't work.
That's a bit like
people give me food. I'll meditate for 5 hours. But
that's a bit like
you're a working man. Forget it. You can't possibly do that.
Precisely. It's a bit like telling people to follow their passion. If you're a rich person, you can follow. You can become a painter. It's easy for most people, not everybody. Usually, the genius painters probably aren't to the manner born. But telling a working class person to do that is kind of silly. And I think that, yes, 5 hours a day is a lot to
even 1 hour a day. I mean, in my mind, if you can meditate 1 hour, you are a master meditator. Most people meditate for 10 seconds and then go to sleep one way or another, because it's very, very hard to hold concentration for that kind of period. And I don't think it's necessary. I really think you can get the insight you need in a very short time, and then you can extend that time. But if you don't get the insight, the chances are you're doing nothing. You're just sleeping on your cushion in one form or another. Maybe you're sleeping in the idea of meditation. So you think you're meditating when you're actually not, or maybe you are actually sleeping. And to me, neither of those are very helpful. What you really need to do is to say, look, we'll do it for a short time, but let's do it right. And then stop. Right. So don't blow your mind thinking you've got to turn it into an hour. Just do your 3 minutes well. And this is just like learning a skill. They always say, if you're going to learn a skill, do it well for short periods and do those again and again. Don't try and spend 6 hours over it. Just do it well for a short period. And that way you train yourself into an actual skill. And to me, meditation is a skill. It's not some mystical thing. You're not communing with the gods. You're just learning how to work with your experience as experience, rather than using your experience to say things about the world, which is an inference based on that experience. And so this is the trick, and it's changing the focus into something we're not used to focusing on.
So it's kind of like, your book is a succinct way for the average person you can point out the great way by showing them these 3 minutes, pointing out the way, basically. Yeah.
Pointing out the way. Yeah. And at the end of it, if they want to go on and become big time meditators, they can extend the period. Or maybe they just want to use the cognitive freedom that they get by understanding experience as experience to become better painters or better businessmen or write better books. Or what it really doesn't matter what you do with this. You found cognitive freedom. Freedom from what? From reflexive reactivity. The problem we have, and this is the fundamental difficulty that all humans have, is reactivity that is reflexive and takes over our response to events before we realize it, often completely unconscious. And so by the time we're reacting to events, it's already in stone, our reaction. We're just in action reacting. And that's highly, highly problematic. And the reason it's problematic is that reactivity is based upon what we learned, whether it was by experience or background, parental influence or whatever. It's what we learned. And unless we can get to grips with our reactivity, we're always going to be narrow because we're only ever going to respond based on what we learned. Now, the interesting thing is the common language has a very interesting term, recognition. We say we recognize you. I recognize you. Now, when you look at that word, cognition, recognition, and what's actually happening is our reactivity is recognitive. We recognize, I know what this is. Now, if that process is unconscious, we're trapped. Literally, what we've learned imprisons us. And what meditation allows you to do is to separate cognition from recognition. And in realizing you can become aware of cognition before it is recognized, you become free of words, you become free of opinions, you become free of you. You are actually at the coalface of experience where it's truly arising, either the five senses or the gate of mind and imagination. That's where it actually happens. And if you can get to cognition and become conscious of cognition, then you can see recognition as an arising of. You can be advised by it. Maybe what you recognize is valuable to you. But maybe you go, yeah, it could be one of those, but you know, I wouldn't mind looking at this. Suddenly you become creative. You're free of the rut. You see things other people don't see. You're able to release capacities you never knew you had because they weren't part of your recognitive toolkit. And to me, that's a very, very important benefit. It's so important that I feel that meditation should be taught in primary school along with reading and writing. It should be reading, writing, and meditation. I think then we would all be free in a very fundamental way from our education alienating us and imprisoning us in a very, very destructive worldview, which unfortunately is what happens. And so, I feel quite passionately that meditation is an important skill. The interesting thing is it's very, very easy to teach. All you've got to do is encourage people to narrow their focus to one of the gates and observe it, and then understand the difference between concentrating in a fixed manner and savoring what you concentrate. And once you pass out the difference between those two phases of concentration, you open the door into non-reactivity, which is the posh term for that is shamatha, calmness. But it's not dead calmness, no thought, no sound, nothing, just a void. It's actually just non-reactive. You could say it was engaged, but non-reactive. And when you look at someone who is wise, that's exactly what you see. They're engaged, but they're not reacting. Oh, God, I'm so freaked out. That's not what a wise person does. And to me, that's the great fruit of meditation. And that non-reactivity leads to clarity of mind. And the posh word for that is vipassana, which literally means passana, seeing, clear seeing. You see clearly because you're not reacting. And to me, that's it. And if we can train that and do so systematically, the benefits are self-evident. I mean, really not even an object of debate. Being less reactive is clearly valuable.
Yeah.
Well, and the dog whistles that we're exposed to, and nowadays with our mobile phones, all that sophisticated advertising, and now with ChatGPT, God, I tell you, if we don't learn how to be non-reactive, we're going down a very difficult road.
I think I can't agree with you more. I want to kind of come back to the structure of the book. You mentioned the gates, right?
Yes.
The sensory gates and then the internal, like the imaginal realm, so to speak. If you can kind of like be a bit explicit about that and describe how they're rolled out from the book. And,
sure.
And speaking about, ChatGPT and all that stuff, you do have an app that comes with the book.
I do,
so that you do have an app, despite all the bad.
Yeah, when you do that.
All right. So maybe you can kind of talk about the structure.
Yeah, sure. And so, just with regard to the app, you can download the app free from my website, richarddixey.com, richarddixey.com. And all the app has is the exercises, by the way. Now, the interesting thing about this app, and this is really what this book is about. So let's get into this book and talk a little bit about it. So this book is a contract in which I'm promising you, I'm going to explain everything I want you to do. Little short chapters, but it's so simple that I can explain it. And then the contract is the reader does 3 minutes a day. That's it. And I don't want people to read this book as a book. I want them to do chapter 1, 7 days, and then read chapter 2, 7 days. And what will happen is they will find the referent in their own experience for what I'm trying to explain. This is it. You see, we have to find within us the referent. Otherwise, this is just theory. It doesn't mean anything.
Right. Yeah.
Now, the app is even stronger because the app has the exercise for week 1. You can get that, but you have to meditate 3 minutes 7 times, and it counts you before it will release week 2. So it's not trying to trap you in anything. It's forcing you down a road of doing the week by week by week. Now, what are the gates? This is a really nice metaphor. I really like this. If you look at your experience as experience and say, well, what am I actually experiencing? Like, what am I, forget what's in the quote world. What am I experiencing? It's either going to be one of the 5 senses, touch, taste, feeling, etc., or it's going to be thoughts and imaginations. There's nothing else you can experience. Now, the metaphor that's normally used is our inner life is like a city, and it's got 6 gates. And those are the 6 avenues of experience, the so-called 6 gates of experience. The problem is this, and again, this is what the ancient meditators saw that has now been confirmed. We are refreshing our model of what's coming into the 6 gates 20 times a second.
Wow.
20 times a second, we are mapping the inputs of the 6 gates, which means we've got this thing going click, 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 taking still photographs. And what happens is if we aren't conscious of recognition, we then recognize things arising at one or other of the gates and react to them. Mm-hmm. So on top of this click, 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 click is all this internal turbulence as we're reacting to what's going on. And so as a result, we end up completely muddled and really essentially flying on controls. So meditation begins with a very simple step. And this is true in every tradition. What you do is say, look, guys, we realize you weren't born with an instruction manual. So there's no point in me telling you all this. What I want you to do is to narrow your attention to one of the gates. Now, in the West, we've been introduced to what's called vipassana meditation, which doesn't exist, by the way, or mindfulness meditation, which doesn't exist, by the way. What really is happening is they're saying, concentrate on the touch, the sensation of touch, one of the five senses, at the tip of your nose when you breathe. That's what they're really saying, which is actually a form of shamatha meditation. And if you do that, you simplify from 6 to 1. And then they say, just watch what's going on there. Now, you could take any one of the gates. And indeed, in the book, I go through different gate meditations. There's no need to just look at touch. There isn't anything magical about touch. But what is important is this next statement. We've been taught to concentrate, all of us. Contemporary education makes a virtue of concentration. Your mummy said it, Johnny, concentrate. We've all heard that. Concentrate. And that's because Westerners are very good at concentration. But what they're not taught is concentration has two elements. And this is, again, where the meditation traditions have a lot to offer. The first element is to take your attention and place it on an object. That's called to advert your attention, which is where the word advertising comes from. It captures your attention. But unfortunately, that kind of adverted attention is brittle. You can advert your attention on an object, but then another sound or a thought or whatever happens, and suddenly your concentration is being adverted on this other thing. And there are reasons for that, which we can get into if you like, but that's actually what's happening. We're getting pulled this way and that by reactivity. But there's a second phase to concentration, that's savoring. So once we can savor what we've adverted to, we can become stable in our chosen meditation object. And it's quite literally like taking a piece of chocolate, putting it in your mouth, that's adverting, and then tasting the chocolate. That's savoring. And once we can savor what we've adverted to, we then discover we can achieve stability because we're savoring our experience rather than reacting to it. And this is the fundamental step forward that opens the door to stable meditation. Once that happens, we can then develop stable meditation. Now, many beginning meditators only know about adverting. So what they do is they concentrate on an object and then get upset because they're always being disturbed. Don't slam the door, don't talk in the next room, or even worse, how can I stop thinking? My thoughts are disturbing me. This is a very common complaint. And they even think that meditation is about having no thought. Not at all. That's a total misunderstanding of what meditation is about. And that's because they're only adverting. So what we do in this 14-week series is we go through a series of meditation objects to encourage savoring. And once we've got to savoring, then we begin to work with the most powerful gate of all, which of course is the mind gate. The mind gate of imaginations and thoughts is the most important of all of our gates. And we start directly engaging with it. And that leads us to a deep exploration of really what it is to be me. Because at the end of the day, whatever I am, it's something to do with thoughts and imaginations. It's not really to do with senses. I mean, the senses are inputs to this, but the real place where the world is made is in the mind. And so we get to the mind gate pretty quickly.
Wow. Okay. So what happens when you get to the mind gate? What kind of techniques or ways of, I guess, instead of just looking at your sensory experience as an object, looking at thoughts as an object?
You can say looking at thoughts as an object is correct, but that sounds weird. Look at thoughts as an object. Okay. What's really going on in recognition is what we need to establish. We are naked apes, puny, pathetic physical specimens, frankly. Even my cat scares me. God knows what a cougar is. And the reason is that we came from the savannah, but we learnt from our experience. Mm-hmm. So human beings had a very rocky ride out of Africa, I must say. I don't know if you saw, only yesterday there was a report that there was a point where there were only 1,200 breeding pairs of Homo sapiens. We almost died 800 BC, 800,000 BC. And so we really had a rocky ride out. But what was the skill set that enabled us to go from hunter-gatherers on the savannah to driving around in Ferraris? What did that? It was our ability to learn from experience. So this capacity to recognize using not only instinct, which is what the cat's got, but also learnt experience, and so we can learn from the past, is incredibly powerful. It is a remarkable evolutionary advantage that we uniquely have. I mean, animals have it to a limited extent. We have it in spades, and that's why we dominate. And if we're not just careful, we're going to destroy the world because we have this very powerful capacity. The problem is this map making, and it's literally making a cognitive map of experience. This map making is inherently paranoid. And it's paranoid because it's designed to protect us. Mm-hmm. It's really designed to say, those pointy things in the bushes are actually a saber-toothed tiger. That's literally it. That's what it's designed to do. It's not designed to make you happy. It's not designed to make life meaningful. It's designed to protect you. Now, of course, as we move into modernity and we confront rapid technological, ecological, political change, that inherently paranoid map maker has only got the past to guide it. And so our reaction to change is always paranoid. Is it going to affect me? How's it going to affect me? That's why news is always bad news. No one cares about good news. You never get a headline that said, something went well. So who cares? It's something went badly. That's what I want to hear about because our map is paranoid. It's trying to protect us. So we have to learn a skill to deal with the map maker. Now, the map maker is not an enemy. Actually, it's an overprotective aunt. It is literally like the aunt that says, Johnny, don't go out at night. You might get mugged. You know, it's that kind of rather annoying person who thinks they're looking after you. And actually what they're doing is trapping you in some very narrow idea of what's possible. And the map maker is like that. So we need to learn how to control our map maker so it becomes an advisor and our natural intelligence takes the throne of being. Now, this is a fundamental change in life. Once we are free of reflexive map making, that reactivity I've talked about, we can take the throne of our being and we can choose whether to be advised by the past or react to the present, i.e., we become broader, more creative, more able to deal with change, more flexible, all kinds of very, very good things. Now, to do that, we have to progressively disentangle map making from innate intelligence. That's really the task that confronts us. We need to see the map making happen by gradually enabling a skill to see thoughts arising, because thoughts are the language of the map maker. Mm-hmm. The map maker talks to us through thoughts. He says, oh, you should do this, you should do that. And indeed, people spend their whole life either on the phone talking to someone else or off the phone talking to themselves. We are literally talking the world into being. We're being advised by this guy telling us what's good, what's bad, what you want, what you don't want, et cetera, et cetera. So again, once we start separating cognition from recognition, the voice stops. Because the voice is not in cognition. The voice is in recognition.
Well, what is this natural intelligence? What's this natural intelligence? You piqued my curiosity, and hopefully people listening in can. This sounds like a very Buddhist concept.
It's not really.
No,
it's innate intelligence. So there's this is the bigger philosophical program here. Western culture and contemporary knowledge is based in inference.
Right.
The assumption is that inference is everything. There were philosophers, came from Kant, Heidegger, Wittgenstein, etc., who began to question whether logical analysis alone is complete. And indeed, Wittgenstein famously said, the philosopher Wittgenstein, that the purpose of philosophy is to free our natural intelligence from its bewitchment by language. Mm-hmm. That's to say, if we couch everything we know in words, we are limiting our capacity to know. Now, what do I mean by know? But we have words in English which are very interesting. One is intuition. We have intuitions about things which are direct. Another one is first impressions. When you first meet someone, you get a flash of information about them before it's covered over with all kinds of politeness and engagement. There are lots of examples of this natural capacity to engage with an object. And of course, ancient culture is full of relics of direct experience. So we find ancient medical systems with remarkable insights about the medicinal properties of plants. Again, there's no indication they did any botany. They certainly didn't do clinical trials, but somehow they knew that Mucuna pruriens, for example, contains 2% L-dopa, and they were treating people with Parkinson's disease in the 2nd century in India. So how do they know that? It's like, what is this knowledge that people have? And there is a strong argument to be made, and it's actually a mathematically valid argument, that there is no linguistic structure that can be complete. This is the famous mathematical proof of Gottfried Frege, who showed that no logically coherent system can ever, there must always be one premise given to it from the outside. There has to be a metaphysic that comes from the outside to start any logical system. Now, science is a language. That is the proper way to understand science. It is a precise, experimentally defined language where the terms are carefully defined in terms of experimental data. That's what it is. And like any language, it requires a knower. It can never justify itself. There must always be a point of origin which is not in that language. In exactly the same way, the little voice that talks in our head is a language. It's a language based on our own experience, what we wanted, what we didn't want, what was good for us, what was bad for us. That little voice depends on a knower. Who is that knower? We are that knower. As long as we give over to the voice, allow our reflexive reactivity to take us over, we dethrone our innate intelligence. Now, this innate intelligence is not some mystical, magical thing. It's actually our ordinary intelligence, which has just been co-opted into reflexivity by the protective mechanism that maps experience. And all we're doing as human beings is saying, I'm going to take that back. It's no more, it's common sense. Mm-hmm. I'm a great believer in common sense. Mm-hmm. Now, scientists always say, but common sense is always wrong. Not true at all. And again, this is a trope of Galilean science, which was used as a polemical device to destroy medieval scholasticism, that somehow subjectivity is always mistaken. But that is not the case. If you train subjectivity, you can train yourself into very precise observations. As I said, many of the insights of meditator monks are now being confirmed by rigorous experimental techniques. But the experimental techniques that confirm them are in the third person. They are external accounts of internal experience. They're not internal experience, which means even if you have an explanation of how you make the world, that is no use to you. You have to find out for yourself on the inside. Now, these two positions are complementary. They're not equivalent. They cannot be combined. Neither invalidates the other, except this is what you actually experience, and this is what you infer from that experience. There isn't a mind-body problem. There just isn't. It's simply a category error, thinking those two things are the same. That's where a lot of our problems come from. We are told, and often educated, that science will explain everything. Of course it won't. That is so stupid. When you really start thinking about that statement, it is a very dumb statement, because the knower can never be explained. The knower is a given that you have to have science. There's no point in saying that science can explain the knower. Of course science can't explain the knower. The knower makes the science. It is ridiculous. Right. So it's also, how do we train the knower?
And it's also like saying that those are ultimate propositions that are true for every living being on the planet. But if I try to teach science to my dog does not get science.
Yes.
Dog has a totally different knower experience than I do.
Absolutely. And the dog's neural experience is narrowly focused in instinctive advice. But when you look at an animal, you do get a kind of vibe that there's someone in there looking back. The problem is their range of knowledge is quite limited because they haven't got language. They haven't got this incredible capacity we have to express ourselves. I'm not saying language is a bad thing. I'm really not. I love language. I think expressiveness is vital, but it is never total. And recognizing that there is something else that is fundamental. It's literally, there's a famous story. We've all seen it. The king of Rohan in Lord of the Rings is asleep on the throne, and the vizier is advising him and taking over the empire. And eventually the king awakens and says to the vizier, look, I'm the boss. Or in Aladdin and the 1001 Nights, same thing. The sultan's asleep and the vizier's taken over the throne. The reason why that comes up in a lot of fairy stories is it's the case. We are being taken over by a linguistically generated, overprotected map maker. And what we learn to do in meditation is say, okay, I got it. You're good, but I'm the boss. My innate intelligence must always be the boss. Now, you could call it embodied intelligence. There's lots of words you could use for it, but it's not some mystical, advanced, whatever. It is actually common sense, really.
The person who's also generating the language is the experiencer, not the knower, right? So the knower, and if you extricate the knower from the language, there's a logical problem. It no longer works that way.
If you have no knower, that's why lost languages. This is why lineage matters so much. If you have language with a broken lineage, you never really know what the referent was. You can work out what the language means in a logical way, but you never really know. Why did the Greeks call the sea wine red? Were they seeing it like wine? What's going on with these guys?
It's not wine dark. Yes, it's rather Mediterranean. It's rather bright blue in many places.
So what the hell is that? Yeah, there it is in the language. And we'll never know because we haven't got any Greeks we can talk to from that period to say, what do you mean by wine red? It looked like wine to me. And, so it's like that. We have this problem that meaning ultimately requires a knower.
Yes.
And now there's a further term. There's one further term that has to be said. Okay, so the known is a bunch of names. It's a bunch of names. So when I go, I know this, what I mean is I've got a name for it. And that name is defined by something I've had before, learned before, got from a book, whatever, aggregated together in my mind. And then I say, I know it. Now, the interesting thing is in the grammatical structure of knowledge, a known thing requires a knower. So we construct someone called me, ego, I. I know that. I is another name. I is a name. That's why people say, I'm 71. I look in the mirror and I think I am 17. That's because the I that I think I am has just a name. Just like if I pick up a coffee cup, the coffee cup never ages. Might break it in the end, but the cup itself, the cupness of the cup, never ages. Now, the question is, do I exist in actuality? That's to say, is I a cognition or a recognition? What meditators discover is there is no I. There's just cognition. We make sense of cognition.
And so this is emptiness, basically.
There's an I and an it.
Yeah.
But there is no I in cognition.
So you're talking about the concept of emptiness, spaciousness.
I don't really want to I'm not going to talk about anything.
Okay.
I'm just going to say this, because remember, I'm not allowed to do that. I'm just going to say, if you cognize before you recognize, all there is the sense input, the action, the arising thought, whatever it is. There is no I there. The I comes when you remember it. Now, this is a very, very important recognition. Memory deceives us. Mm-hmm. Now, the way memory works is memory uses recognized things to locate in its filing structure what happened. So it recognizes me, I, as locating this body wherever it was happening, and it locates time and place. And in so doing, it says, okay, I was there. But memory is always in the past tense. You don't say I is there. I was there.
I would
and
say
that's because memory is deceiving us. In actuality, I wasn't there at all.
I would say that, yes, it does deceive us.
Vishnu's Maya is what the Hindus call it. Vishnu Maya.
It does deceive us, but at the same time, the inner experience of the memory is a real thing for you. It doesn't make it a constant. It doesn't have to be a constant, but the actual inner experience of self or experiencing, knowing the knower is going on.
No, careful. I think you're conflating two things. Yeah. Memory contains lots of references of I, lots of I references and place references. If you allow memory to arise at the mind gate, because it's part of the mind gate, and you observe it, there's no I observing it. It's constructed from I and place, of course. So the memory trace contains an I. That doesn't make that I real. And in fact, when you start observing what is happening to you, memory is creating an I in all kinds of circumstances. But the I is different. There's an angry I, a sad I, a happy I, an annoyed I. Well, there's an I sleeping, there's an I who's awake. There's an I everywhere because it's just a referent. It's not actually a thing. And that's such an important recognition. That's how we're getting into some really deep teaching. But it's a valuable teaching.
But the experiencer is always experiencing. But if you can separate the fact that the experiencer's there's no I. There's the experience of being an experiencer.
Wait a minute. And then, what do you mean by the word experiencer?
Well, you're the
one who experiences.
You're the cognizer. Yeah, you're the cognizer.
Careful. Yeah. When you say you cognize, what does that mean? That you're separate from your cognition?
Absolutely not. You're one and the same.
So there's just cognizing. There's no you there. Separate from the cognition. There's just cognizing. Okay. We create a linguistic structure that says you cognize and separate from a single thing two things. And we would call that in memory. In our world map, the world map is made up of two things out of one thing. All there was cognizing. The cognizing turned into two things as we made sense of it. But in the action, in the actuality of the cognizing, there was only one thing.
Oh, so the map maker is in the cognizer.
The map maker is the cognizer.
Right.
The map maker has as its structure a cognizer and a cognized thing. That's what's happening. It is a reflexive, recognitive display of a knower and a known. Okay. And so as long as it's reflexive, we act as if the cognizer is real. But once we overcome the reflexivity and we start actually getting to cognition, not recognition, we find to our surprise that there wasn't a knower there at all. It was part of the structure of recognition. It's a device that we require to locate in our extraordinary memory banks where we were at the time. Otherwise, there'd be no knowing.
So the natural intelligence is what?
Direct.
Is what?
So that's why we use this word intuition. When you have an intuition, it just happens to you. Right. You don't have an intuition. It just happens to you. You just get this thing that says, oh, I know what that is. I see that. You are not actually doing anything. The intuition just happens to you. Just like creativity just happens to you. You don't do creativity. Creativity happens to you. Now, religious people say that's God. They say that's God speaking to you. And that's fine. I don't mind people saying that. But in the actuality of it, it just happens. Because really everything just happens. That's the honest truth of it. When you even just moving your hand in front of your face, if you truly observe what's going on, it's just happening. There isn't someone doing it for you. It's just happening. But we tend to be so map bound that we are stuck in a recognitive construction of I and it. And that's a Maya. It's an illusion.
It brings to mind a quote from Alfred Korzybski, "The map is not the territory."
It's not the territory. And the territory has no I. Absolutely. I'm a great believer in that metaphor. I think it's an incredibly powerful metaphor. And so most people who aren't aware of this live their lives as though there is an I, ego being, who is somehow in control of their lives. That is a construct. And that I, ego being is merely an accidental accumulation of everything you've learned, done, been influenced by, etc. And sometimes people live miserable lives. And you say, why are you so miserable? Oh, I'm a miserable person. So, no, you're choosing to be a miserable person. That's what's really happening. You're not really a miserable person. You're just a person, but you're choosing to be miserable because you have identified misery with I. And because you're in reflexive reactivity, you're stuck. And this is true of depression as well. It's one of the reasons why the latest breakthroughs in treating depressions with chemical substances that break the world map work so well, because when you break the world map, you break free of embedded preconception, which is such a feature. Now, this again, Western philosophy got there, kind of, but never had a systematic path to analyze it. Asian philosophy did. And that's because the philosophers meditated. So they meditated on what they were learning. And as a result, they gained insight in a logical manner into world construction. And this is extraordinarily valuable knowledge. It's not scientific knowledge. It's not inferential. It's direct knowledge. But it is nonetheless valid. And of course, it addresses the word truth, which is such a problematic word in modernity, because truth has become conflated with scientific inference. But it is not. Truth can never be inferential. Truth can only ever be direct. If truth is inferential, it's not really true. It's just a logical construct, and maybe your inference is wrong. What you're really looking for in truth is something that is direct. And to me, this is why we have all of these big, big questions that start lumbering into view once we separate cognition from recognition. That is the first step. If you don't make that separation, these big questions always remain totally enigmatic. You just can't get to them.
We do have to wrap up. I could listen to you for hours. I could ask you questions for hours. I'm enjoying this immensely, but we do kind of have to wrap up here. What would you say the take home for the average listener who just somehow stumbled upon this? Not maybe the psychologist might be listening to this, because I could give you inferences of what I try to do with people in the consulting room is precisely make cognition more flexible by, they come in either over time coming in, pulling out the problem. We look at it as an object. Eventually they might get that inference, get that metacognition and go, oh, wow. Yeah. I guess I was making that up myself. The map maker was doing that or something along those lines. Different metaphors, right? But it's the same thing. I think that, Freud and the Buddha had a lot in common, and that's been explicated a lot these days in popular culture and in scientific literature and clinical literature. But what would you say to the average person who stumbled upon this, Richard, and who's listening in and following along? What would you want to have them take away from this conversation?
Okay, well, I teach at Dharma College, and we have courses on this kind of stuff. Actually, one of our faculty is an instructor at the Freudian Institute.
Okay.
This isn't new stuff. What I'd say to people is this. This book is like a cookbook. Meditation is not religious. Meditation is a skill. It is a fundamental skill, and I hope anyone who's bothered to listen to this 45 minutes will see it has profound implications. So just like learning to fry an egg, just try it. That's all. Don't forget what you were told it was. Just try it and try to find in your own experience what's being pointed out. And that's what I really want people to do, because it's like, and going back to the chocolate metaphor is really good. If you'd never had a piece of chocolate and I said to you, I'm going to tell you what chocolate is. It's sweet. It's a bit sticky. It's brown. It's got a funny nutty aroma. None of that would mean anything to you. I have to give you. It's like that. Here's a piece of chocolate. Don't bother. No words required. Now, meditation's like that. I can't give you meditation experience. You have to give yourself meditation experience. All I can do is point you with words to exercises that are so simple that you'll get them. Now, this is not because they're elementary. They're just simple. That's to say, we're only pointing at one thing. And so my wish and my hope is that all those people who've learned about meditation or heard about meditation and either said, well, it's not for me, or it didn't work for me, or it's too complicated, or it's religious, or all these ideas, they don't just try, like the piece of chocolate, and just try it. And I'm pretty confident, because you've taught this a lot over many, many years in this college we have, I'm pretty confident they're going to get the taste of chocolate. And once they get the taste of meditation, it is self-evident. It doesn't require the Buddha to tell you it's a good idea. You get it immediately. It's like, oh my God, this is self-evident. It's like learning how to walk or something. It's self-evident. It's just a part of being a human being. And that is what I would hope people take away. Okay. And so the contract is, I'll tell you what to do. You just do it for the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee for once a day. And at the end of 14 weeks, like a dripping tap, drip, 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 it'll fill a bath. And suddenly you'll find yourself in your working day being able to fall back just for a couple of seconds into engaging with your experience rather than reacting to your experience. Now, that little time out, literally 2 seconds, is enough to transform reactivity. It's like the call of a cuckoo in the morning. Just you hear, oh, what's that? Just for a moment, you're free of all this reactivity. And then from there, the path can open to you, whatever you want to do with your life. It really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And so it's not like there's some destination we're going towards. We're just becoming more human with a simple life skill.
Yeah. Well, that's a very compassionate message. And I think that's been transmitted all the way back to about 500 AD.
BC.
Yeah. BC, yes. BCE.
BCE.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Richard. The book is again, and where can they get it, and who's the publisher?
Oh, okay. So it's called 3 Minutes a Day, a 14-week course to learn meditation and transform your life. And the publisher's New World Library. My name is Richard, Dixey. So if you go to my website, richarddixey.com, you can see where to buy it. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indie, or indeed you can go on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Indie and look it up. 3 Minutes, Dixey will find it. And if you just want to have a taste of some of the first meditation, just go onto that website, richarddixey.com, and you can download the URL for the app. Well, actually, there's one of those little boxes, I forget what they're called now, and you photograph it on your mobile phone and it uploads the app to your phone. And you can try it out. And, as I say, just try it. Don't learn about meditation. Please don't become a meditation expert. Just try it. And it's like learning to ride a bike. You suddenly get it. It's like, well, I'm riding a bike. Well, it's like that with meditation. You suddenly get meditation. And then it's like, wow, this is such a good thing to do. And 3 minutes is plenty, honestly. Plenty.
Lovely. Well, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you too, sir. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for listening. Did you know the Psychology Talk podcast is all over the World Wide Web? Well, not entirely all over, but we are in social media and we do have a website. Pop over to www.psych-talk.com to find out more about the show. All material is copyright the Psychology Talk podcast. Opinions of our guests are not necessarily those of the host or the show. Material is provided for entertainment and informative purposes only. If you need a mental health professional, please seek one out. Music is provided by the band Serenati.